Hey everybody, welcome back. It is our second video, the Noles 24/7 pre-spring offensive inventory. We talked about Jordan Travis and the QBs before. Kevin Little's throwing up signs because you know he's feeling it. Today we are talking about the running backs. Guys, the running backs under Mike Norvell are never a concern for me. And I don't think they're going to be this year again, man. They were extremely productive last year. It almost seems like Mike Norvell, one of the elite offensive minds in the game, he can take people that have been casted off at other programs, catastrophic knee injuries, and just turn them into, I don't know, maybe the best running back in the entire conference. We're talking running backs. We're going to talk about all the departures, all the improvements, all the retention, all that good stuff. But before we get into all these specific names, Brendan, how you doing, man? You ready to talk some running backs?
Trey, I'm doing well. Do you think anyone's going to notice that we're wearing the same shirt as the last episode? Is that
Probably
What a
not
weird
until you
coincidence.
tell them you are not. I'm never
uh,
going to take you on a crime with me. You snitch so fast. No, we did laundry and we're doing this on another night. We're not recording these consecutively. Kevin, how are you doing? You look so much different than the last time I saw you in the quarterback video.
Yeah, I've grown older and wiser, and I'm ready to kind of try to impart some wisdom.
Well, let's talk about the running backs. Productive, deep, multifaceted, talented, threats out of the backfield, used in a variety of ways, yada, yada, yada. Duh, it's a Mike Norvell team. I guess before we talk about the guys that were there, let's talk about the big one that went, and that was Treshaun Ward. He transferred to Kansas State. Um, Brendan, I'll throw it over to you. I think we expected at least one running back to leave. It's a transfer portal era. These guys need touches. Everybody's trying to get to the next level. I think losing Treshaun Ward kills me. I was a big Ocho defender on here. I loved his vision. I loved his patience. I thought that he was a little bit more talented in the passing game than a lot of people gave him credit for, in my opinion. But if one was going to go, I I don't know. I'm trying to think, like, do I feel the worst that it's him, or was he the right one to leave when you think about all the other guys and all the different skill sets they bring to the table? How do you feel about it? I'm still slightly disappointed.
it's a bummer because he was a fan favorite for a reason, or a rags to riches story. I mean, self-made, walk-on, king of the spring, and earns a scholarship, and not only earns a scholarship, but earns a starting role in Florida State's backfield and the ACC's leading rusher in yards per carry 2 seasons in a row.
Ooh, two
Which
time.
which is an incredible story and is a testament to him as well as Mike Norvell. Uh, FSU didn't have enough carries to go around, and like you said, in the transfer portal era, plus with the NIL era, like you got to get yours while you can get it, and especially at running back when there's a finite amount of carries that you're going to have in your career, most likely. Injuries are always right around the corner, and Treshaun had to deal with injuries this past year, right? It's difficult. I didn't want him to go. I think his skill set might be the most replaceable with what you have, but beyond the traits that you mentioned, Trey, and summed up nicely, uh, he was a leader, and he was someone
Good point.
who was well respected, not just within that room, but that entire offense. And a quick anecdote: 2 years ago, him and Jermaine Johnson got into a couple of preseason fights, like knockdown dragout
Sweet.
fights.
Sweet.
Uh,
Okay.
and as it turns out, those two guys being the ones getting into fights was kind of a good thing based on like who they became, right? And I think it was maybe
Yeah.
telling of like alpha dogs trying to figure some stuff out. So you don't know in the moment, like, is someone like blustery or what's happening, but like in hindsight, uh, that was Treshaun Ward. He did not back down to first round draft pick, someone who's like a foot taller than him, Jermaine Johnson. So Treshaun Ward will be missed, but you have the talent to replace him. I think almost more than anything is like, do you have the alpha mentality, like who steps up in that regard? And I think that's kind of a storyline I'm interested to watch this spring, because who replaces him in that regard.
Yeah, we got to see who gets in the
Yeah.
most fights out at spring. That's who I want. You got to be sharing this juice with me, man. I didn't know about that. Kevin, what do you think about the guys that Florida State's got coming back? They got Trey Benson coming back, who, my goodness, especially towards the middle and the end of last year, what a freaking tank. You got Lawrence Toafili, who has been getting better every year and a really dangerous threat out of the backfield. You've got a guy who showed flash and who's definitely going to get more production and carries this year, and Rodney Hill. What do you think of the room, Kev? Do you think it's going to be better than it was this year?
Yeah, so I think I kind of want to start with talking about, I think Trey Benson and Lawrence Toafili are what I would call like zone running backs. So these
Okay.
guys are kind of they're longer striders. They take a step or two to get their momentum going. But then they have a good top speed, right? You saw that with Trey Benson. I think Toafili's like that a little bit. I think he likes to dance too much, which I don't think flatters his kind of build necessarily.
Sure.
I think he would be more effective as more of a downhill guy. But Treshaun was really unique on out of the three that got significant reps, and the fact that he was more of a true power, a gap scheme guy, a counter runner, right? He was good at reading those blocks, being patient as pullers pull across the line of scrimmage, setting up bounces. And I kind of wanted to ask Brendan, who do you think's the best person to step up and replace him in that kind of area?
Ooh.
I think it's Rodney Hill, and I think it's a pretty I'm not going to say easy replacement because we know what Treshaun Ward is, right?
Right.
But with Rodney Hill, I think you were doing like a certain calculus in your mind as a coaching staff. No one's told me this. This is just me connecting dots. So with Treshaun Ward, he had one more year left, right? With Rodney Hill, if you didn't play him this year after he looked really, really, really good in practice and really good in the limited opportunities he had in garbage time this past year. If you didn't play him this season, you probably don't get him for a third year. So again, a transfer portal era. So
Right.
2 years of Rodney Hill or 1 year of Treshaun Ward. I think that's kind of the math you're starting to weigh. But from a skill set perspective, there are similarities. They're both high vision, very instinctive, natural runners. I thought that's something that Treshaun Ward did extremely well during his FSU career. And I thought Rodney Hill had this super, watching him in practice, like he was so much fun, the super, just very fluid running style where he saw blocks open up, holes open up, blocks set up, and kind of was able to just feel his way through traffic to then explode into the open field. He has more top end max speed than Treshaun Ward has. Whether he has that feel and that gritty, consistent running style, like we have to see what happens in games. But for that little quick twitch, and then you find a crease with your vision type of running style that Kev mentioned, I think Rodney Hill's the clear cut replacement there, because the other two guys are more strider, take a while to get going types, like you mentioned.
Yeah, known
Right.
quantities as well. So that would be, and like you said, we in the transfer portal area, you do have to do that kind of roster calculus, and I think it kind of played out like you said. Nobody's told us anything. It just connect the dots, like Brendan said. Kevin, we noticed, and I think we talked about it at the beginning of the year, how Mike Norvell last year, like I think most of his like base running concepts, like the zone plays, inside zone, outside zone, obviously counter. That's what he showed a lot at Memphis. In 2021, our base play was counter based on the offensive line wasn't where it needed to be, some of the limitations at receiver, whatever, that ended up being the base play. Can you talk about kind of the expansion of the concepts that Mike Norvell was able to do last year in 2022, Kevin, just based on, better receivers, more consistent offensive line play? And what do you maybe expect to see from the running game in 2023 with mostly known quantities coming back?
Yeah, so you saw really when Treshaun Ward went down and the team had to rely on Trey Benson, which ended up being a blessing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Kev Southern
Blessing.
Blessing, that's right. That's a big blessing for Benson.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, they went way more with the outside zone. So in the previous years, in their time at Florida State, they've been counter. And in fact, I think even this year, they ran more counter than basically anybody in the country. But they ran a lot more outside zone in comparison to previous years.
Right.
Because that's what Trey Benson does well. What you're losing with Treshaun Ward is really that guy that's able to get you yards when your offensive line isn't winning. So if Trey Benson can't get his steam moving forward, we saw against Clemson, we saw against Florida, we saw it against Oklahoma, we saw it against really any team that had a defensive line that could stagnate the offensive line. He didn't put up the numbers that he normally put up, right? I think Florida he did better, but Oklahoma stymied him, and he had a little bit of a come out game against Clemson, but there were times NC State he didn't look great in, right? So
yeah, good call.
So having a guy, hopefully it's Rodney Hill this year, that kind of is the 1-2 punch to that lets you kind of get back into your comfort zone with a counter type run. I mean, Trey Benson can run counter as well as most people in the country. It's just that Treshaun Ward was probably the best counter runner in the country. And so you're having to replace that, and you're having to kind of fill in gaps and kind of move stuff around. So I think you're still going to see a lot of counter. I think you're still going to see a lot of outside zone. That's what he lives with. That's what he's comfortable with. But I mean, you saw when they were trying to get Trey Benson going and he was struggling to get downhill, they would go under center. I think you might see more of that this year. Like some direct under center snaps, kind of allow him to get a few steps downhill instead of kind of running horizontally like you have to do out of the shotgun when you run outside zone. So I think if you're going to see anything, I think you're going to see them kind of put in more of that, allow Jaheim Bell to kind of chip and go downfield, allow Jordan Travis to get outside on rollout plays after a handoff. I think you'll see them kind of lean into that like Shanahan outside zone type feel more than they did in previous years.
Kev is all on the San Francisco 49ers.
I was going to say
I did
that.
not mean to make the two back-to-back comparisons.
Let's go.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, especially back-to-back when we're recording on two separate nights. Very coincidental.
Not wearing the same shirts at all.
I'm with you. One thing on Trey Benson I think is going to be interesting too. Obviously, he really caught on near the middle and the end of last year, save for like the Oklahoma game and some things like that. I think another year of him getting all those reps, another year removed from that devastating injury, another year more like with David Johnson's coaching. He's done a good job coaching running backs here in Mike Norvell's system. I think that we're still scratching the surface on Trey Benson, to be honest with you. I'm glad we have him back. Any other guys that you want to talk about before we kind of wrap this thing up? Any other things of note? I think it's going to be primarily those three. Anybody could maybe sneak into the conversation?
Real quick, if I could talk about Trey Benson, like if I could throw out a nerdy stat for you guys.
Oh, we're some big old nerds on this, so please do.
All right, so I do think that we are creatures of recency bias, right? Like we go with what we last saw, and Oklahoma 13 carries for 25 yards, not great, 1.92 yards per carry. To Trey's point, which is why I was shaking my head, nodding my head vigorously, of like this being someone who needs a little while to get going, how he was coming off of the knee injury. So he had a really good season opener against Duquesne, but it was Duquesne. Against LSU, he had 6 touches for 15 yards and just looked kind of slow and sluggish. And we got to see him kind of as the season progressed a little bit. That game against Clemson, there was this light bulb moment, I think, as a coaching staff, like, oh, we can run outside zone consistently against anyone, pretty much. He had 7 touches for 69 yards. Nice. After that, 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the next 5 games, 100+ rushing yards. And according to PFF, he avoided a tackle 54.5% of his touches. So every other touch, he avoided a tackle. More than that. No one else in the country, comparatively, had more than 49%. So he was a good 5% points better than anyone else in the country. I think there was some number out there that he might have the most missed tackles per carry ratio in like the history of PFF, which is only 4 or 5 years old, but still, like he forces missed tackles. So he is your for people wondering if he would have been better to have Treshaun Ward stay and maybe him not be the feature. So. That narrative got out there from some, but that's Trey Benson is an NFL caliber running back. To answer your question, Trey, CJ Campbell's one guy who I would say keep an eye on because he does a lot of things well. He has a little bit of Treshaun Ward, not only with his backstory, but running style and build as well. And I'm a big fan of CJ Campbell. I think he's probably a year away from taking on a bigger role, but someone to keep an eye on.
Yeah, he's one of those guys where if you're in practice, you'll see no hole and he pops out the other side and you're just like, okay, well.
Yep. Very Ward-esque, right, Kev?
Yeah, that's the impression I got. I was kind of thinking that you might answer that a little bit when I asked that question earlier, but I think Rodney Hill's a good answer as well.
Well, it's an embarrassment of riches, guys, and Mike Norvell, he came to chew bubble gum and coach tight ends, and my man's all out of juicy fruit, right? Like, it's a done deal. The running back, I said tight ends, whatever, running backs.
Oh, it was so good.
I screwed up, man. Sorry, Rowdy Piper. Okay, my bad analogies aside, the running backs are going to be fine. I think that they'll be just as good with, honestly, the surrounding talent and some of the other positional groups we're going to talk about. the rest of this week while wearing the same outfits, I think that we can get even more production from the running backs this year. Guys, I'm feeling great. Felt great about quarterbacks, feel great about running backs. Do you guys share my optimism so far?
Yes, absolutely.
Man, this is so much different than years before. I feel like $1 million. Guys, I hope you feel like $1 million. You're going to feel like even $1 trillion if you just stay on the Knowles 24/7 YouTube page and you watch the rest of our videos. Next, we're talking wide receivers. And I can't wait. For Kevin, for Brendan, I'm Trey. Love you once again. Sorry, Roddy Piper, for the missed analogy. Keep chopping.